I just maybe start with where Fiona left off. We have to say that it's absolutely unacceptable that there are women staying in violent relationships because of the housing crisis. That there are women staying in the refuge for as long as they possibly can. Why? Because there is nowhere else for them to go. I've been contacted by somebody in that situation myself, and it's disgraceful that there's people being not evicted from the refuge, but leaving the refuge into a homeless service. And that is absolutely disgraceful at a time when, let's not forget, we have a record number of, I don't know, you may not have heard what a high net worth individual is. It's a billionaire. We have 3,000 new millionaires in Ireland just last year, new additional ones. And ironically, there was 3,000 children availed of services from domestic violence agencies. I thought the two figures really showed, really well where the priorities are in this society. But later on, I think we should talk about what can we do practically, because everybody wants to assist this issue, and hopefully we'll hear from some of the women in the local community who we kind of came together, people have been coming together to discuss how we could, in Dublin 15, in Blanchardstown, get more resources for the refuge itself, but also get outreach services, because most women will never go next or near a refuge, even if they are experiencing violence. And also the idea of a rape crisis centre in Dublin 15, because we have a massive young population and services like that are needed. And we know lots of women who are put in a triage system, as Fiona said, when they ring the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and they have to go into the city centre to wait for services. So there's some of the things that we've been campaigning on and people should come in and speak on, but also how can we advance that? This is the Taoiseach's constituency, and I think that's a strong point that we should use. But I want to start with a very positive picture actually as well, because I think it would be wrong if we came to this meeting and we all went away more depressed than we were when we came to it. That's not the purpose of it. It's not to traumatise everybody. Because actually, as we speak, the issue of gender violence is becoming one of the biggest political issues on the globe. And I think that is really positive, because it has not happened until recent years. So we have a French film crew, and fair play to the people of France, because I believe about 50,000 people marched today against femicide. The rate of femicide in France, this is an advanced, EU country, one of the biggest economies in Europe, and has a shockingly, disgracefully high rate of murder of women. 10,000 marched in Rome on Saturday, 10,000 marched in Brussels on Saturday. In Mexico, people might have seen, if you follow on social media, you probably won't see it in the mainstream media, Latin America has an incredibly shocking rate of femicide. Particularly macho culture, huge numbers of people living in poverty. But there has been a movement and a reaction against it from all across Latin America for the last number of years. And in Mexico, where 10 women are murdered every single day. There's been a huge movement taking place to, it began with a commemoration from somebody who was murdered, and it's now spreading and spreading again. But we haven't had marches in Ireland, but it has been a huge issue. In the last 18 months alone, you would have seen a whole number of issues. First of all, we had what I think is one of the most disturbing and shocking cases of a 14-year-old girl she was a victim of femicide. She was killed because she was a girl, really. And that is the reality. Of course, it's complex. Every situation is different. Not to pin everything into one issue. We're not saying it's simple, but that's exactly why she was killed. She was a girl. They didn't like her, and that was that. And why is it that boys that young are getting such messages? That is something that we need to discuss in society. Last month, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre stated there was a public health epidemic of sexual violence. This time last year, lots of you were sharing pictures of your underwear online with the This Is Not Consent protests that followed the disgusting victim blaming at the Cork rape trial. Ireland trended worldwide over that issue, and obviously we brought it into the Dáil as well. And in March, many of you would have marched through the streets of Dublin following the Belfast rape trial, when a young woman who she herself was put on trial, even though she had taken wealthy rugby players to court, and she was put on trial because apparently fake tan, that's consent, that you're going out that night willing to be to sleep with anybody. Her clothing was passed around the jury, and I think things like that just galvanised people. There was a massive reaction within hours of the verdict. I believe it was trending all over, and protests took place. And anyone who was on that march will recall the slogan that usually you have chants that you think about in advance for a march, but the crowd just started chanting "Sue me, Paddy," because of the reaction to the cheek of your man Paddy, who talked about taking people to court if they dare to even implicate him with this. But we would be wrong to think that rape myths have gone away. They actually haven't. If you read the paper on any given day, and I spoke in the Dáil this last week, so I had a look, and in one trial, for example, the complainant was savagely beaten, but a barrister, that wasn't even contested, that was agreed. But the barrister still argued that she consented to the sex part. So even when people are beaten once and multiple times, they're then, even the barristers are trying to open up misogynistic ideas like that. In another court, one woman who said that she hadn't consented because she was drunk, and that was her case in the court. There was even some video evidence. And the barrister still argued that she wasn't that drunk really because she'd been able to pull her skirt down after the event. These are happening in courtrooms in the last month in this country. And these are some of the issues that we have to demand of the political system. When these were raised after the Belfast rape trial, there was a report set up. It still hasn't actually come out. We're still waiting on it to happen. But people will know the figures here. 10 women murdered annually since 1999 in Ireland. 1 in 3 women experience coercive control. It mightn't be physical, but it's, mental control. 1 in 4 physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner at some point in their life since the age of 15. And only 1 in 3 of the recommended refuge spaces, as Fiona has said. And you really do have to judge how important the government views things by how much they're willing to fund it. But yes, they have slightly increased the funding they gave, but because of Me Too and because of the huge, social change that's taking place on this issue, which is very positive, more people are ringing the Rape Crisis Centre, and funding has not kept pace with that. And as I said, SONAs have had to turn away hundreds every year. I hope Fiona doesn't mind me saying, but I think it galvanises your mind. Up to 500 families were turned away last year from the refuge. And that means that other things may have been found for them, but it's still a shocking figure. It really is, that 3 or 4 times more were turned away than sought help. And I want to just say that, yes, we want more funding, but we want to end gender violence. We actually want to challenge the culture that creates it. Because it was interesting what Fiona said about this idea of young people being told, "Oh, you're so lovely, I don't want anyone else looking at you." But all of these kind of reactionary ideas are part of the culture. And there was a youth worker made an excellent point recently that was covered in some of the papers, when she said, "We live in a society that has a pattern of effectively grooming young girls into accepting abuse as a normal part of the growing up process." And she talked about, the Hollywood culture, where manipulation is often dressed up as romance. If you actually think about so many of the situations that we see on film and in our culture. And I think that that's also what we want to challenge. It isn't just a case of let's accept forever that this will happen and just throw more money at it. We want to completely stop. I just want to maybe talk about some of the politics as to why I think that this is happening before we have a discussion. So I think that the type of society that we have, capitalism, uses rigid gender roles to its advantage in every single way that you can imagine. First of all, look at it economically. We all know women aren't paid equally. The gender pay gap is actually increasing. And it's not just that women aren't paid equally, they're in lesser paid jobs that they're conditioned into, since childhood. And that suits capitalism completely. Just like racism suits it. It was very interesting, the Google workers who took action, in the walkouts, was it last year or the year before? Last year, which I think was inspiring, against sexual harassment and the payoff of millions to, the top chief executive. And they won a great victory on that. But in doing that, they also challenged the differential pay between women and people of colour that was going on in the company. So I think it really shows how the whole thing is interlinked. And if you look at Harvey Weinstein, very powerful people. Jeffrey Epstein, stomach-churning interview with that prince in England. The entitlement, the divorced from reality, the way that these people think that they can do anything they like with young girls and children, and get away with it, that nobody ever questioned them, and nobody did for years, and similarly with others. But if you have a system, in my opinion, that rests, the whole thing, the DNA of it is inequality, is it any wonder? We now have globally a situation where the figures vary depending on who does them, but Oxfam, 8 men, and they are 8 of the richest people are men, control the same wealth as 3.5 billion people on the planet. So you have people like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. There's a bit of a competition going on between them actually as to who's number one right now. It was Bill Gates for about 25 years, and then Jeff came and stole a march through having his workers on a treadmill and in Amazon. But people like that, I mean, just imagine Bezos, 130 billion. You could never spend that in your entire life. And that's the sort of wealth that's there up at the top. And then inequality growing. So it's very difficult to have gender equality either when you have a system that rests and justifies that. I think, just want to finish up with where we go from here. 2 of the most positive things that have happened in Ireland, in my opinion, was the same-sex marriage referendum and also repeal. Because they were movements that came, from below over many years, and particularly with repeal, it brought, and we all saw it in this area, it was led by young people and driven by young people and women, and particularly in working class communities. Any of us that canvassed were bowled over by the progressive attitudes that have developed in Ireland over, recent years, and how so many women can testify to this. The feeling it wasn't just about abortion, it was about the position of women in Irish society. And it was about so much more. And I think that we've won what was a historic victory, but there's still what I call unfinished business. Because if you look at some of the facts, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but we produced a leaflet on it, the numbers of lone parents, because as Fiona said, any woman from any class can experience violence. It is not confined to any one class, and it would be completely and utterly wrong to think. We know that anyway from very wealthy women who've spoken out. But there is no question that if you're working class, you are in a much more difficult position escaping it. And the housing crisis has interacted and created a perfect storm for a continuation of that. But we actually had some discussions with women in the area following repeal and recently. And we asked people, we were trying to find out what were the main issues that we could maybe look at highlighting now that repeal was won. So some of the things that came up were obviously the housing situation, the rent situation, the way it's hitting absolutely everybody. But childcare, a number of, one woman told us that she lies awake at night unable to sleep, worried about who's going to mind my kids on Thursday, how am I going to get to, who's going to look after them on Friday. The stress that working class women in particular are under, trying to juggle all of these things, economically and socially. And I think that's something that obviously we want to fight on. But one of the issues that we decided to front load was the issue of violence against women, because we just felt it's something that affects everybody. And it led to us deciding that we would try to highlight the issue of the refuge, obviously in Blanchardstown, which is a national refuge. It isn't just for Blanchardstown, by the way. And there's only 3 in the greater Dublin area. That's absolutely shocking. Absolutely, unbelievable. But 20 million given to the entire domestic violence sector, 5 million given to sexual violence. It's just chicken feed. It really is. I mean, if you were to campaign, it would be for 5 times that, so that those people, 5 times that amount, would be turned away. And we have to say that this is not acceptable, and that this is something I think that we could actually, if we organise properly in the community, win a victory on. And I think let's have further discussion on that. So I think gender violence is definitely something that's particularly important, and that we can take inspiration from all around the world, that there is a global women's movement taking place on this, that's intrinsically linked with challenging the system that rests on racism, sexism, ethnic division, and of course class division, and is also challenging, neoliberal economic policies and capitalism as well.